All right, hey my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Restored Mind Show. My name is Matt Codde, and thank you so much for tuning in. And today's episode is going to be about the idea of being authentic and the importance of authenticity, and why it's really important for not only our own health, but our recovery as well. And so, what got me thinking about this topic, as we're on this series of telling the truth, I was thinking about the movie Flight with Denzel Washington. And in the movie, Denzel plays a pilot and a person who's, really struggles with alcoholism. And at the very end, he has this opportunity to essentially lie and get off scot-free for everything. And he just kind of freezes up on the podium and just pours out everything and, essentially, is just really honest and incriminates himself and essentially and ends up going to jail. And he ends up talking about, he's going in the last scene he's talking about, and he's like, I was just at a point where I couldn't tell any more lies. And he's like, the ironic thing is, he's like, I'm sitting in a jail and it's the first time that I feel free. And I just thought it was just such a powerful ending. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen it. Sorry, I ruined the end. But the point that I really want to drive home here is we talk about the importance of telling the truth is why it's so important to be authentic, right? And, Dr. Gabor Mate, wrote a book called When the Body Says No. And in the book, he talks about, as humans, we have two really basic needs, right? The ability to attach to others and the ability to be authentic. And what he points out is that when we feel like our ability to be authentic threatens our ability to attach, what we'll do is we'll always generally choose attachment, right? Because attachment is more important, for survival, especially at an early age of life. And so, but what he talks about is when you aren't authentic, what happens is, you begin to suppress. And so that's the first point that I really want to make is that idea of authenticity and attachment and those two basic human needs. And when we realize that authenticity threatens attachment, if we believe that being authentic threatens attachment, we'll choose not to be authentic and we'll choose to attach. Right? And so let's just use a very simple example, right? Of if a child throws a tantrum and their parents yell at him for throwing a tantrum, well, and because he was angry about whatever, he didn't get a cookie or, whatever it is. What will happen is the child will learn subtly that me acting that way could threaten my attachment, and then, maybe won't lash out in anger, right? And so, which can lead to, the child ultimately not expressing anger in a healthy way, burying anger, right? All that stuff. And we know, this, in many ways, right? I mean, there's many people that do that aren't authentic about, their sexuality, right? Obviously that's a big thing, where people suppress that to, ultimately maintain attachment to their families because they're afraid if they are authentic, their families might outcast them, right? Or, even in this day and age, I think even the idea of, your political ideations, right? If you don't align with, in many ways, people on the extreme sides, it can almost feel like, you might get attacked or, people might lash out in an angry way on you for just expressing something that's counter to what they believe, right? And there was actually a really interesting podcast by Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report, and he talks about, coming out as just someone who's not on the really far left, right? And he was just talking about how when he started doing that, it was just such a difficult thing for him, and it was a really interesting listen anyway. But the point I want to really drive home here is this idea of authenticity and attachment, and when it comes to mental health, especially, many of us aren't authentic, right? And I can attest to this from my own story, right? It's like when I was really struggling with anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, things like that. I always wanted to put on a face like everything was okay, right? I would always tell people, yeah, I'm good or I'm fine. Because I was always afraid to tell people what was really going on, right? And what that leads to, though, is it leads to us suppressing our feelings, right? And also leads to us having to lie, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. You're a lack of authenticity, right? You're lying, right? You're not being genuine. And it's not that you necessarily need to tell everyone your problems all the time, right? There's times and places for this. But that's the second real point that I want to make here today is the idea of lack of authenticity leads to suppression, right? And suppression is, just generally speaking, a very dangerous thing. Now, in Gabor Mate's book on When the Body Says No, he talks about how the suppression of anger manifests in the form of disease. And if we think about just that idea of anger, right, when you get angry, what that usually is telling you is that you're perceiving something to be incorrect, right? There's some kind of injustice or imbalance, and that's what generally arises, that feeling of anger. And people that can't stand up and, address something that's wrong, right? Because, whatever, they just don't feel like they have the courage to do so, or whatever the reason is, what they'll do is they'll suppress the anger. And then in Dr. Gabor Mate's book, he makes a pretty convincing argument that constant suppression of anger manifests into, specific diseases, and terminal diseases. And that's what the book is called, right? When the Body Says No. And what he says is essentially, if you can't say no for yourself, the body will eventually say it for you. And when we think about things like anxiety disorders, well, anxiety disorders are in many ways our suppression of anxiety, right? Because anxiety, by its very nature, is a normal human experience, right? Anxiety is normal, right? And I know people love to pathologize anxiety, like, oh my gosh, I feel anxious. It's like, well, it's a normal feeling, right? But when we bury anxiety, right, that's when it really becomes a problem, because it starts compounding and piling up and piling up and piling up. And the more and more we try not to feel anxiety, actually, that's what causes it to get worse and worse and worse and worse, right? And that's where, one's ability to be authentic and to express what they're really feeling, and to be able to, tell other people in a safe place, in a safe environment, what's going on. That's why, people will say, being authentic or telling the truth is so liberating, right? We've all heard that phrase, right? The truth will set you free. Obviously, that's taken a little bit out of context in the book of John, but I mean, the message is pretty straightforward, right? It's like the idea of living in the truth. You don't have to remember lies, right? You don't have to try to tell stories and craft and worry about what other people are thinking. You're just being honest, right? And there's a certain liberation that comes from that. And that's in the movie Flight, when he was talking about the idea of, being in a jail, right? And for the first time feeling free, really it was just free from himself, right? Free from having to try to control this narrative and control what other people thought, and always lie and always remember what lies he told. I mean, it was just such a powerful scene when I was watching it. And so really that was the point that I wanted to drive home, right? Is the idea that, authenticity and attachment, right? Being authentic, if we believe that it will threaten our ability to attach, we'll suppress our authenticity. And when we suppress it, that is what actually manifests more and more problems, right? And our ability to be authentic and be ourselves is in many cases what, like, the start of liberation, the start of healing for many of us, because we're able to surface what we're really dealing with and then begin to face that head on. And so I just wanted to toss out those ideas this week, and however it might look for your life, I mean, just to just to start looking at that, and to start looking at ways of trying to be more authentic, more real with people, standing up for yourself if it's not something that you usually do, to be able to say no when things are wrong. I mean, these are really important things, because if you don't, it will just compound again and again and again. And, so for those of you that, support our show, we really appreciate if you like and subscribe, comment, give us feedback. We always appreciate to hear from our listeners. And, and just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this week. We really hope you guys have a great week, and we wish everyone health and safety as we continue on through this pandemic, and we will get through it together, guys. And so thank you, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.